Good evening, all, and welcome. Things are sure to get spooky tonight with the many tales of haunted homes to come your way, so get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Number 1. I used to work doing maintenance at historic properties. There was a historic house museum I worked at when it wasn't open to the public. It was part of a whole landmark site with a visitor center and offices. The house was about half a mile up a dirt road in a wooded area. Sometimes I worked with a crew, but there were a lot of times I would be there alone. One cloudy and dark day, I was working alone, getting ready to replace some electrical work on the exterior of the house. I went inside, turned off the circuit to the entire property, and tested it. It was off. I locked the doors and went outside to work. After about an hour, I got down from my ladder and started walking around the house. Then, one of the lights inside the house turned on. I started to freak out, but thought maybe someone was playing a joke on me. I called the visitor center on my walkie-talkie. They confirmed that the only other person working that day hadn't left, and all the keys were present and accounted for. That's when I freaked out and ran half a mile back to the office. I made my coworker come back with me to check out what was going on. When we got there, the lights were off again, but the bulb was still warm. The doors were still locked and the circuit was still off. It still gives me the shivers to this day. Number 2, when I was in college, I was in my bedroom. The building was warm and modern, so I was caught off guard. You expect ghosts in old stone buildings, not here. I lived in Lincoln, UK, a fairly old historical city. I was lying in bed one night playing Pokemon Diamond, hunting for shinies. My friend had caught a shiny Spearow, and I was looking for something to counter it. Eventually, I came across a shiny Mareep. Ignoring my slight excitement, I started battling. It should have been a routine sleep and throw, but things are never that simple. My haunter's hypnosis missed, and Mareep paralyzed me. After a few rounds, I managed to catch it. As the Ultra Ball rocked on the ground, I noticed movement from the corner of my eye. I looked up above my white desk light. At the end of my bed was a woman dressed in black, just staring at me. I stared back silently, my brain frozen. Without looking away, I felt for the light switch and hit it. Assuming the light would make her disappear, it didn't. I shouted and jumped out of bed, running to the living room where my housemates were. They were super concerned. When we returned to the room, there was nothing there. They mocked me for the rest of the year. Number 3. I live in a haunted house. People say ghosts aren't real, but I know what I saw. This was an old farmhouse in rural Norway. It belonged to my now ex-wife's family. No one stayed there. It was her uncle's summer cottage. We needed a place to stay, so we used it. At first, it was peaceful, nestled in a valley by the fjord. We brought our cat with us from the US, and she loved it there. For the first few months, everything was normal. Then, the voices started. At first, they were just muffled noises, like women speaking from far away. Then, one night, the lights in the kitchen came on, and we could smell food cooking. We heard women talking in there. I assumed her nosy family had shown up unannounced, but it was 3 a.m., so I was more annoyed than freaked out. I headed to the kitchen, still hearing the voices. The moment I pushed the door open, the voices stopped. The lights were still on, the oven was warm, and the smell of food lingered, but no one was there. Things only got worse after that. We would hear screams from the cellar and attic, usually in the middle of the night. The cat grew more agitated, acting as if she could see things we couldn't. The final straw was one night when we heard our cat howling. We found her on the ceiling, defying gravity, her eyes glowing red. She looked at us and, in a raspy old woman's voice, said, "Get out," in Norwegian. The glow faded, and she fell to the floor, acting normal again. We left the house that night and never returned. Number 4. In college, I lived in a house with 4 girls and 4 pets. One night, I had the house to myself, which was fabulous because I had a paper to write. I was in bed with my laptop when I heard scratching at the door. It was the dog, Miko, shaking and whining. The two cats, Ralph and Bina, streaked in behind him, jumping onto my bed. Suddenly, Ralph's hair stood on end, and Miko started whining. At that moment, I heard footsteps upstairs. The footsteps kept walking, as if they were pacing back and forth, even beyond where the walls of the house should have been. Miko started growling when the footsteps turned around and sprinted back toward us, followed by a door slamming shut. I grabbed a baseball bat and walked upstairs, but no one was there. Number 5, I did not believe in ghosts until I lived in a haunted house. It started with little things. The bathroom door would always burst open if someone closed it, and there was a strange red light in the spare bathroom at night. One night, while sitting in the living room with my girlfriend and roommate, we noticed the shape of a woman's face in the window pane. We all saw it, but the final straw was one night when I was brushing my teeth. I felt a sudden tug on my sleeve, like a fishing line being pulled. That's when I knew something was wrong. Number 6. It all started when I was around 7 months pregnant with my daughter. I was asleep in bed with my husband when suddenly I woke up and looked out into the hallway. There, I saw a toddler who I thought was our 2-year-old son walking in front of our bedroom doorway, dragging a blanket behind him and disappearing into the laundry room. Instantly, I got chills and the hair on my neck stood up, but I figured it was just our little guy sleepwalking like his dad used to do. I woke up my husband and asked him to get our son and take him back to bed. Looking confused, he got up, went to the laundry room, and came back saying, "Jade isn't here, sweetheart." I was baffled. I had been watching the laundry room entrance the whole time and hadn't seen him leave. My husband then went across the house to our son's room and found him sound asleep under the blankets. Months later, after our daughter was born, I was in the shower while the kids were down for a nap. I was rinsing out my hair when I heard little running footsteps and a giggle. I opened my eyes and saw a little boy, not wearing the clothes my son would normally wear, running across my bathroom into the closet. Strangely, I wasn't scared. This happened multiple times over the next 5 years. The boy seemed to age over time, always running around whenever I was in the shower, as if he was chasing something. The most recent encounter happened one morning when my husband and I were asleep. Our 2 eldest kids, aged 5 and 3, came into our room to wake us up. I told my oldest son to let his little sister use our bathroom, and for him to use the one down the hall. He just stood there staring. I repeated myself, and he turned to go down the hall while my daughter went into our bathroom. I sat up waiting for them to return, but my son came back alone saying, "Hey Mom, can you turn on the show please?" I replied, "Let's wait for your sister." He turned around and said, "She's still asleep, Mom." I was confused because I saw her go into our bathroom. I got up to check, expecting to find her sitting on the toilet half asleep, but the bathroom was empty. When I went to her room, there she was, sound asleep under her blankets. Since then, I often hear little footsteps upstairs, especially when we are downstairs or in the hallway. Number 7, my firstborn used to have night terrors. When he would scream bloody murder at 3 a.m., I would run into his room only to find it ice cold and him staring at the same corner every single time. He's an odd soul. I have no doubt he sees things. When we moved out of that house, the night terrors stopped. About a week after we moved into our current house, my husband and I were laying in bed, about to fall asleep, when we both heard the sound of glass shattering. We sat up in bed, hair standing on end, sure we were being broken into. My husband got up to check the house, but nothing was broken. We searched every room, every window, nothing. Then 3 nights later we heard it again. This time it was even louder, but once again nothing was broken. It never happened again after that. For the first couple of years in this house, I would hear people talking. If I was upstairs, I'd hear them downstairs and vice versa. I could hear them walking up and down the stairs, thumping and creaking. Their voices were pleasant and conversational, but the strange part was that I only ever heard them when my husband was gone. It was like clockwork. The moment he left, within minutes, the sounds would start. I've also heard a baby crying in the house, but every time I'd go to investigate, it would stop. I've felt like something was following me around the house for an entire day once. It opened and closed cupboards, drawers, and even moved things slightly on the counters. This only happened once, but it lasted for nearly 6 hours straight. My kids didn't notice anything, and I didn't try to draw their attention to it. I was starting to feel sick to my stomach and had butterflies. A panicky feeling like something was watching me. Number 8. My house was haunted, and 1 week of it was completely off the chain. It started with light banging sounds in the middle of the night. Then my son started screaming. I ran into his room and he begged me, "Mommy, please make the drawers stop. They keep opening and closing by themselves." The next night, I went to warm up a bottle for my newborn. As I bent over the table, the light bulbs in the chandelier above me exploded, showering glass everywhere. The third night, a balloon my son was holding got yanked out of his hand and floated all over the house, eventually disappearing into the basement and then up into the attic. I could see the string moving, as if something invisible was pulling it along. The next night, at 3 a.m., my neighbor called, panicked, asking if it was okay to check on my kids because there were a dozen people surrounding my house. I looked outside but saw no one. The police arrived and found no signs of anyone. Another night, my neighbor pounded on the door, asking why the lady in my attic kept staring at him through the window. But where that window was located, there was no flooring. No one could even get over to that window. The final straw came when I was taking a shower. I had placed my swaddled newborn in the middle of my bed, surrounded by pillows for safety. When I got out of the shower, my baby had somehow been moved off the side pillow and was dangerously close to the edge. There was no way a tightly swaddled infant could have moved that far on her own. That's when I lost it. I screamed, "Whoever you are, you're out of here. Don't mess with my kids. I have Jesus Christ on my side." I had the house blessed, and after that, we never had a problem again. We moved out, and since then, 2 other families have moved in but quickly left. The house is now vacant, as everyone who tries to live there gives it back to the bank. Number 9. Back when I was in college around 7 years ago, I had to move apartments last minute because, well, I was a lazy student and hadn't made any plans. My parents were in town, so we were looking for something quickly. Luckily, we found a somewhat nice and cheap 4-bedroom basement apartment right in front of the university. The landlord said the previous tenant had canceled last minute, so he was giving us a great deal. The main room was a living room with a small table. To the right, there was a kitchen and bathroom. The bedroom was on the left, connected to the living room by a strange, narrow hallway. From the moment I moved in, I always felt uneasy in the bedroom for some reason. I preferred sleeping on the sofa bed in the living room, especially since the bedroom had no windows. Throughout the semester, I often felt like someone was watching me whenever I was alone, either watching TV or playing video games. The feeling was strongest when I was near the bedroom door, so I often kept it shut. I brushed off the weird feeling and told my friends, who all laughed it off. I figured it was just me being paranoid. When the semester ended, I moved out and forgot about it until 2 years ago when a friend from college, Dave, texted me out of the blue. "Hey Jack, that apartment you lived in back at uni, was at door number 5? He asked. I confirmed it, curious why he was asking. He then sent me a picture of an old newspaper obituary from 2009 that he found while browsing in the library. It showed a photo of a young woman and the same door number. She had hung herself in the bedroom closet. The room that had always felt so eerie to me suddenly made a lot more sense. Number 10. In my culture, if someone dies violently, you're supposed to burn their clothes immediately. My uncle, who was a degenerate loser and a predator, died in a fitting manner. He was dragged by a car and thrown into a ditch. The coroner's office released the clothes he was wearing at the time of his death. My uncle had warned his wife, my aunt, not to look at them, but curiosity got the best of her and my mother. While they were downstairs looking at the clothes, I was told to stay outside the room. Suddenly, we heard a loud smash upstairs. We ran up to find glasses shattered all over the floor, but no one was there. It was winter, and the house was in the middle of nowhere. That night, during the wake, a family friend was driving past the accident site. She swore she saw my dead uncle standing there, smiling at her in a chilling way. The next morning, my other uncle, who was keeping watch overnight, told my mother and aunt that he had heard the crunching of boots on the snow around 4 a.m. He went outside with a shotgun but found no one. My mother and aunt then confessed to him that they had looked at the clothes. He was furious, saying he had warned them. They burned the bloody clothes in a fire immediately, and after that, the strange occurrences stopped. Number 11. When I was 16, my friends and I had access to an old apartment building in Chicago that belonged to my friend's parents. The building was supposedly connected to tunnels built by Al Capone's gang, but his dad had blocked them off. We used the roof to hang out and smoke. The only way up was through the attic, which had no lights, so we had to use our old flip phones as flashlights. One day, my friend Manny and I were heading up to the roof. I stopped to use the bathroom while Manny went ahead. As I was finishing up, I noticed a shadowy figure moving in the dark attic. Thinking it was Manny trying to scare me, I shouted, "I know it's you, stop messing around." I followed the shadow figure into a corner but found nothing. Then, from downstairs, Manny yelled, "What?" Terrified, I realized the shadow I had been following wasn't him. I ran downstairs, shaking, and found Manny talking to his girlfriend. To this day, I'm certain I saw a shadow person. Some people suggested it might have been my own shadow, but that's impossible. I was holding my phone in front of me the entire time. Number 12. This happened at my old house in Toronto. 3 of us lived on the main floor, while a stranger lived in the basement. We didn't know much about the guy, except that he was a heavy gamer and smoked a lot of weed. Almost every night, I could hear him coughing like he was about to hack up a lung. But what was weird was that the sound wasn't directly below my room. It seemed to come from beneath the garage. Curious, my roommate and I decided to check it out one day. We found a creepy red door in the basement that led to a crawl space filled with trash, old furniture, and mold. It was essentially a dungeon. The basement tenant had moved out, but it still reeked of stale smoke. My friend said he moved in a day after the previous tenant left, yet the room was already filthy. Here's the thing that still gives me chills. For 2 weeks after the guy moved out, I continued hearing that horrible coughing coming from the basement. Even though the place was supposed to be empty, number 13, this isn't my story but rather my cousin's. I practically lived at their place growing up. My family has always been superstitious, especially since we were raised in an Asian country where these beliefs were considered facts. My cousin claimed to have seen a strange man standing outside their gate, muttering odd things before walking away. The family was on edge, thinking the house might have been cursed. Soon after, strange things started happening. One of the girls in the family saw a little woman in Victorian clothing crying on her bed. There were sightings of doppelgangers of family members at night. At its worst, one of my cousins suddenly broke into a fit in broad daylight, screaming about a bearded man glaring at him from the corner of the room. The family had had enough and brought in a local priest to cleanse the house. Things seemed to calm down after that, though my cousin swore he kept seeing shadows moving around for months afterward. Number 14. When I still lived with my parents, I experienced some strange things. My bedroom was in the basement, and I remember a few times hearing footsteps upstairs. When I went to investigate, I realized I was home alone. One night, I heard someone coming down the basement stairs. A few moments later, I heard a door opening somewhere. I called out but received no response. The next morning, I asked my parents about it, but they insisted they had been fast asleep upstairs the entire night. I would also hear faint whispers from time to time, but I usually dismissed them as random noises coming from the old wooden house. But the most terrifying thing that ever happened was one night when I was walking down the hallway toward the bathroom. Suddenly, a shadow figure appeared right in the middle of the hallway, not against the wall but directly in the center of my field of vision. It disappeared in less than a second, but I clearly saw it was the shadow of a person wearing a long dress. I moved out almost 2 years later, and nothing like that has happened to me since. Number 15. When my mom married my stepdad, we moved into his little brick house in a small Texas town. Things were going well, and we were settling in nicely. My stepbrother and I were getting along, which was a relief to our parents. But soon, I started waking up in the middle of the night to see a figure standing in my bedroom doorway. It was a large man wearing a wide, brimmed hat, and he seemed to fill the entire doorway. Even though the house was completely dark, I could distinctly see his silhouette. I could feel him watching me. He would put a finger to his lips and go shhh, then laugh in a low, eerie voice, almost like a whisper. It terrified me, but no one else in the house ever saw or heard anything. I would hide under my blanket, shaking, until eventually I'd peek out to see that he was gone. This happened at least once a month, sometimes more frequently. My mom later confided that on nights when my stepdad was working the night shift, she would feel someone crawl into bed with her. She even felt the covers being pulled, but when she turned on the light, no one was there. Number 16. When I was 13, I stayed over at a friend's house. We were watching The Shining with her older sister and another friend. At one point, I saw a black figure in my peripheral vision. I turned my head and clearly watched a solid black silhouette of a man wearing a cowboy hat walk from one side of the room to the other. I didn't say anything to my friend at the time, thinking my mind was playing tricks on me because the movie was scary. After the movie, my friend's sister and the others went out, leaving us alone in the house. In the middle of the night, we woke up to the sound of heavy footsteps stomping up the stairs toward the room we were sleeping in. Thinking her sister had come home, we checked, but no one was there. A few minutes later, we heard another series of stomping sounds followed by a loud bang on the wall. My friend turned to me, her face pale, and said, "Did you see the man earlier?" I nodded, terrified. We hid under the blankets and didn't come out until the sun was up. Number 17. My friend's father owned an apartment in downtown Fredericksburg that he would use on weekends to visit the kids. The building was divided into 4 apartments, and my friend's family used the top unit. Since her dad was rarely there, we would sometimes hang out there for some peace and quiet. The building already had a reputation for being haunted, apparently. Someone had been murdered there in the 80s. One day, we were there so she could finish an art project. I got tired and went to lay down in the bedroom about 20 feet away from where she was working. I left the door open so we could still talk to each other. I eventually drifted off to sleep. Suddenly, I heard a whisper in my ear, "Wake up." It was followed by a more stern, "Get up." I jolted awake, thinking it was my friend trying to wake me. But when I looked, she was still sitting in the living room, staring at me in horror. When I asked her what happened, she told me she had seen a shadowy figure pacing around my bed while I was sleeping. She thought I was talking in my sleep, but she saw something whispering into my ear right before I woke up. We left in a hurry and never stayed there again. Number 18. I don't believe my mother's house is haunted, but there was one night that still haunts me. I was woken up in the middle of the night by the feeling that someone was staring at me. It was pitch black, but I could feel a presence in the room. It felt like it was my little sister, but whoever it was felt incredibly angry. I called out softly, "Marie, what are you doing in here?" But there was no response, just an overwhelming sense of rage emanating from the presence. I was paralyzed with fear, my heart racing. Convinced I was just imagining things, I tried to calm myself, but then, out of nowhere, I was struck hard in the crotch. Groaning in pain, I reached for the light, expecting to see my sister there. But when I turned it on, the room was completely empty. I checked my sister's room and she was sound asleep. To this day, I have no idea what hit me, but I never experienced anything like that again. Number 19. From ages 5 to 12, I lived in what I believe was a haunted house. My first experience was when I was about 8 years old. I woke up just before dawn and my bed was right next to a window. I looked outside and saw a man standing on the curb, staring directly at my window. Startled, I pulled away from the blinds. When I looked again, he was standing just a few feet away from the window, staring at me with his mouth hanging open, as if his jaw was broken. A couple of years later, I had another encounter. I got up one night to get a drink from the kitchen. As I reached the entrance of the living room, I noticed a very tall woman walking towards me. She walked past me, reached for something on a corkboard in the kitchen, and then turned back, all while staring at me. She walked straight through the front door, vanishing into thin air. Over the years, my family members had their own encounters. My brother saw two shadowy figures sitting at the dining table, peeling potatoes. My little sister saw a boy peeking around the doorframe while she was in the bathtub. We moved out eventually, and none of us experienced anything like that again. Number 20. This story is about when I was apartment hunting with my boyfriend. We decided to check out an open house in a neighborhood we were interested in. The apartment seemed perfect. It was everything we were looking for. While my boyfriend spoke to the landlord, I wandered around, mentally decorating the rooms. I made my way to the bathroom, where there was a large closet that covered an entire wall. Curious, I reached for the closet door to check out the space. The moment my hand touched the doorknob, a vivid image flashed in my mind. It was as if I were in a daydream. Everything around me faded, and all I could see was a figure. The figure was a man drenched in blood to the point where his facial features were unrecognizable. I couldn't tell if he was covered in blood or if he had been completely skinned, revealing raw muscle. I gasped and let go of the doorknob, shaking off the eerie vision. Trying to regain my composure, I opened a different set of closet doors instead, only to find an empty space. But the unsettling feeling lingered. I quickly left the bathroom and walked back to where my boyfriend was still chatting with the landlord. I looked down the hallway leading to the bedroom, and though I couldn't see anyone, I distinctly felt a presence, as if someone was standing there, watching me. The presence wasn't malevolent, just curious, but it was enough to make me feel uncomfortable. That night, I had a strange dream. I was standing in that same bedroom. Everything was black and white, completely silent, with the sun shining through the window just as it had earlier. I woke up with my heart pounding, even though nothing overtly scary had happened in the dream. In the morning, I decided to tell my boyfriend about my experience, but I downplayed it, saying I was probably being silly. A few days later, my boyfriend called the landlord to confirm we would take the apartment. As they were talking, I noticed my boyfriend's expression change. He looked at me sharply. After he hung up, he told me that the landlord had just informed him that since we were planning to move in, he was legally obligated to disclose that someone had died in the apartment. Apparently, a man had suffered a heart attack and died in that very bedroom. Even though my boyfriend didn't believe in ghosts, he could see how uncomfortable I was, so he agreed to back out of the deal. We decided not to move into that apartment after all. Bonus story: real estate haunting. I used to have a real estate license to help my family with listings. I would travel to take pictures of properties and maintain the tech equipment. There was one particular property I was asked to photograph that had a reputation for being haunted. The only information I had was that the owner had died there and the family had decided to sell. The property was near a field with a cemetery adjacent to it. As I began taking photos, my camera started to act up. I knew my equipment well. I had fresh batteries and multiple memory cards, but my camera kept reporting errors like camera failure or file unavailable. Frustrated, I kept switching out batteries and memory cards, but nothing worked. I decided to rapid fire shots anyway, hoping to capture something. Eventually, my relatives who were with me suddenly announced that we were leaving. There was no discussion, just a firm, quiet decision. The drive back down the mountain was eerily silent. My relatives didn't say a word. When I asked if the property would be listed, they simply said the family was conflicted. The story was that the elderly owner, on his deathbed, had warned them that if they tried to sell the homestead, he would come back to haunt them. When I got home, I transferred the photos to my computer. Out of the hundreds of shots I had taken, only 2 images were saved. One showed a mist hovering above a gravestone, and the other captured a black figure in the tree line where the horses had been spooked earlier. Figure was dark and translucent, wearing a long coat and what appeared to be horns on its head. That was the last time I ever took photos of a potentially haunted property. My camera never had issues again, but I stopped photographing houses entirely after that experience.